poking around the chassis a bit more, do a little more cleaning, looking at the boards more, do a little cleaning on this one, and I'm really torn as to how to work on this set. Other guys I talked to that have worked on this model worked on it with the boards in place, and I get that. It's not like a Predicta where the underside of the board is partially blocked by metal. You can get to all the lugs you need to get to, I'm pretty sure, to replace these parts. And if you shine a bright light on the top side, you can get a better idea when you're working on the other side as to where the components leads are for the part that you're working on. But this thing is filthy. You see I did a little cleaning on this one. Until I did, I couldn't read anything. This one isn't quite so bad, but some of these parts, like the resistor down there, I can't even see the stripes on it. So it would be so nice if I disconnected the wires, took out these 4 screws and popped the board off. I could snip out the components, I can wash down the board, thoroughly examine it. It's been recommended I reflow all the solder joints. In other words, I could really get to town. Whereas if I work on it with everything in place, kind of be working with one hand tied behind my back. It's going to be super tedious to go over and work around these parts. I did some Q-tips and Windex just so I could see the stripes on these resistors. And the crud on these boards is pretty thick. Do you have to clean off the crud in order to get it to work? No. But it makes it easier to see defects, to see problems, to check things. Like right now, what is that? Is that a resistor? Is that a capacitor? Is that a coil? I'm not sure. Yeah, of course I can look on the service info and parts locator and stuff like that, but it's nice to be able to read the component value for what's currently in there before you start replacing things. Hey, speaking of which, now that I can see this a bit better, yeah, pretty sure that's a replacement. Yeah, it definitely is, because they didn't have plastic film caps like that when this was made. So we got one repair there. We got one repair there. So, I'm going to flip this back up and get a look underside again and see just how painful would it be. I figure some boards should be easier than others to get out. So maybe I'll try taking the smallest board out, get a better feel for what's really going to be involved. Because the other thing this thing will clean up beautifully. Just a brief cleaning on the tops of these caps, a little bit on the chassis. There's no corrosion on this stuff. Now some of these other parts, like this shield and the high voltage box, have a lot of surface rust. I'd like to remove these and put them in some type of rust stripper, and then maybe clear coat with a high temperature enamel or something like that. So then they can take the heat but will prevent the corrosion from coming back. Alright, here we are back underneath, and here is the underside of the board we were just looking at. You know, this does not look all that difficult to get out. This is the unwrapping tool I use when I work on Predictas. That should work just fine on this as well. Yeah, it's coming off. These stakes are rectangular, they're not square, so it doesn't work that well. But yeah, it's starting to unravel. So some of these are just wrapped onto these stakes. Some of them are soldered after the fact like that. Or at least the resistor lead that's on top. I don't know if that was a original or a production run change, adding that resistor. They did quite a few revision changes. This is the CTC5D, but they went to a number of revisions after this, so much that there's actually 2 different SAMs photo facts for this. One for the earlier is I think A through D, and then one for the later revisions. So things like that may very well have been a change during the production run, but the point is when they wrapped the resistor lead around that, they soldered it in place, so I got desolder that or unwrap the lug. Otherwise, it looks like all these wires are just wrapped. And of course, I need to make note of what goes where. The color on the wires is still pretty vibrant. You see we've got letters, so A, K, J, H, E, F, G. It's all very nice, neatly labeled. So that board looks like a no-brainer to get out and work on. Some of the others, well, I'll take these panels off to get underneath the shielding. Board like this. Doesn't look too bad, but it's what really the killer is when they add these parts on afterwards. You gotta unsolder it and take the leads off. And some of these wires, after they wrapped it on, they did solder them. That also adds to the fun. This board isn't that bad. So yeah, alright. We've got a plan of attack. It really will be. Just like with predictors. I'm working on some of these on the side too. Once you get the board out, like this one, I washed it down with simple green, removed all the old parts, and now I can work on it very easily on my workbench rather than having a giant chassis. Because if I don't work on this in place, sure, I got enough room to get it up on the workbench, but I got to solder on this side, but identify the part on the other side. Shining a light through from the backside helps. Having service info closer down with a parts locator. But, you know, obviously you don't have X-ray vision. It's a little hard to see exactly what some of the parts are. But, of course, it is possible. I just undid the 10 or so wires on the underside of this board with my unwrapping tool. I'm taking these screws out. I'm sure there are those who will disagree with me and say, "Oh, just do it in place." It's not that hard to do. I get it, but hey, haven't worked on one of these before. I might never work on one again. I want to take my time, go through it thoroughly, and I like to try new techniques. So, there we go. You can really see how clean this chassis was originally. That nice plating. So, with this board out of the way, I can also clean up, which is another reason why I want to do it. So there we go. So now I can put the chassis aside and just work on this little board. And boy, they are brittle. A little piece broke off. See, it's cracked too. So these screws they use, they're just big old sheet metal screws going right down on the phenolic board. So not surprised that it would crack it, but I saved the piece. And super glue works very nicely on this phenolic board material, as long as you don't get it hot. So I'll glue that back in place right now before I lose it, and then I can work on this board at my leisure. Thought I'd back up a little bit and give you guys some context, as it seems like I'm just haphazardly diving into working on a random board in this set. So here is a Sam's photo fact for the earlier revisions, covering the original through revision E as Sam's photo fact. And here is the schematic. Dual 5V4 rectifiers, unconventional, a couple electrolytics, a filter choke, and some high wattage resistors to form a couple different voltage sources. We got a 390, unfortunately there's a fold right there so I can't read it. Maybe that's 300 or 200, and I think 150. And then a whole big mess of tubes for the additional color circuitry, mostly. 3 stages of video IF, semiconductor detector diode, inner carrier set, pick off sound up above, a 1IF tube, ratio detector, preamp, and a 6AQ5 driving a speaker. Down below we got an HEC keying, sync separator, sync amp, vertical multi-vibrator, vertical output 68Q5 driving the yoke, and down below a 6CG7 for the horizontal AFC and oscillator driving a 6CB5 horizontal output tube. All that seems conventional and fine, and what we see on this page is, well, what you'd see in a black and white TV more or less. Then there's a whole lot more stuff going on off to the right and spills onto another page. That's your color stuff. So after that detector, we have a video amp, and instead of that just driving the cathode, say on the CRT, it goes into this stuff. So now we have things like a color killer and burst king and a burst amp. And let's move on to the next page. And boy, look at all this fun stuff we get to deal with. Like a chroma bandpass amplifier and a BY demodulator, GY demodulator, chroma reference oscillator in there. So somebody asked me about the color burst crystal, where it's located. We'll find that it's underneath the cover. It should be inside of a tube, a glass tube looking very much like a vacuum tube. Just an interesting way they did the encapsulation there, but so rather than being a little hermetically sealed metal can, it's inside of a glass vacuum bulb. And down here we get the convergent stuff. Oh, this stuff we're probably going to have to adjust and go through, and blue lateral magnet, and finally there is our CRT with its trio of filament and cathodes and grids. So what have I been working on? That's actually the horizontal oscillator board. So let's scroll down a bit. One nice thing about the SAMs is actual illustrations of a real chassis. In this case, they took the shields off and the high voltage box apart so we can see everything. That is the board that I started working on. Looks like a rather comprehensive SAM's photo fact. There's in particular, so we go from photographical callouts to mechanical drawing. That's the board I'm working on there. So the one tube on it is a 6CG7 horizontal oscillator and horizontal AFC, and the one coil is horizontal waveform, which I'm thinking is what sets the frequency. Right next to it, we see those two fuses and so on. So next to that would be soundboard with some AGC keying. Up here we have a vertical board, IF board. Not surprisingly, the big heavily shielded module is the color stuff. And we have a video amp on that board. Seems a lot less daunting when you break it down by modules. Circuit board's maybe not the greatest manufacturing technique for 1956, but yeah, taking out the boards and working on them one by one and wiring them back in, assuming all goes well, is definitely an easy way to work on it. So here is that board. And a nice big exploded view with every part called out. I can see exactly what it looked like, and there's the one cap that had been replaced. I can see even in just this photo, it's a 0.01 600 volt cap, which is what they had installed in there. Also, I already know that I was wrong about reading that mica cap. I read the color. That's totally wrong. It's a 1000 picofarad cap. C120. And boy, the parts list on this is long, so we're getting into that now. So these are fixed capacitors. It goes over the course of several pages. It looks like we have 164 capacitors in here. And there is C120 with 1000. But it doesn't have a voltage rating, and it doesn't say exactly what material it is. When they don't specify a voltage rating, I think they usually say on here that means it's either mica or sorry, no, it's the way they give the values. If the value is in picofarad, it's either mica or ceramic. So we don't know. Sure, it's a mica looking package. It's probably mica, but I don't trust it, so I already lifted up the legs on it. We're going to test it in a moment. And here we go down through all this. Now, I know RCA has a pretty detailed service manual as well. I might have a copy floating around, or it might be scanned online. I'll try to dig up that too. Good to have such a service info if possible for something this complicated, especially when you get into this. So, as I say, it's nice to have a photograph representation of the chassis and all these call-outs. But when the chassis is this complicated, and this is a scan and a reproduction, of course, so it's less image quality. It's a little hard to see exactly what some of these are pointing to when they're showing the entire chassis at once. That's why it's nice when they break it out and just show you the little board rather than the whole thing. Alright, that's it. Actually, it's only 28 pages or so. Well, in the scan it's down to 16 pages. So yeah, I definitely want to dig up the RCA info. I bet it's a little bit longer and more detailed. Oof. Yeah, this will be fun to align if we need to. Alright, so this has given me more confidence to proceed. Alright, here's the board. As you can see, I am just about done with it. I went with mostly polyester film. One or two of these might be polypropylene. I figure either way is way better than these old paper caps. Now here's that mica cap that I want to double check on. So earlier I'd read it as red, green, orange, whereas I should have been reading it like this. Upper left hand corner I think is the type of material, and then brown, black, red. So 1 0 and then 2 zeros. The green probably means 500 volts. I have to look up what the orange dot meant. Not every manufacturer was consistent. If any of you have ever tried to decode domino mica caps, I think you know what I mean. Alright, let's first test it with just one of these cheapo all-in-one testers. You don't even have to set the type. It will figure out on its own if it's a resistor, a capacitor, or an inductor, or a semiconductor, and should tell us the value. Cheapo clips are not the best. Let's try that again. Look at that, 1001 picofarad. So you might be thinking, hey, it's a good cap, right? Well, this doesn't check leakage. It only uses a test voltage of a couple, maybe 3 volts. Rated for 500 volts. Let's put 500 volts on it and see what we get. That, I've got my old school capacitance bridge. I have had a number of capacitance leakage testers over the years, but this is the one I keep coming back to. It's just easy to use, straightforward, dependable, gets the job done, and it looks cool. So that's why I'm using it. So let's clip this guy on. Yeah. And we are in paper mica mode. Leakage 100, good. 200, good. 4. Alright. And I'll double check the capacitance on this guy. And yeah, right on 1000. Alright, I will leave that cap in circuit. Now, as far as the board itself goes, after taking it out, I did clean it. But I notice it looks kind of crummy. There's a lot of wax on it from old paper caps And maybe they coated this intentionally to seal it from moisture or something like that, but that's what this crud is. If I used acetone, paint thinner, I could probably get it off, but I'm not going to mess with that because I don't intend to unmount this coil with a tube socket. I don't want to damage them, so I'm just going to leave it in. Obviously, I've been replacing parts. I replaced all the paper caps. Some of the carbon comp resistors were out of spec, so I replaced them. I still have a few more to check. And I was advised to reflow everything, so I went around the tube socket and reflowed it around the edges, and I'll go over the rest when I'm done replacing parts. You can get cold solder joints. I was always curious how far they left the component leads sticking out. So some of these are stakes for the wire wrap, so of course they're going to stick out far. But some of these, like this, that's the lead from this capacitor, and it's sticking out 1/2 inch. I was told when they made these boards, I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what I got in a comment, that all the leads came through, they would wave solder it, then run through a machine that would cut them off, and they may have set the blade to be 1/4 inch away from the board or so, which would account for the long lead lengths. But they're not consistent. That's what I find a little odd too. So you can see these all come up a certain length, and then this one is noticeably longer. So if that was, and this one, some of them are a bit shorter, so there was a blade that wouldn't account for that unless it did multiple passes at different heights. I don't know. I suppose it made it nicer for troubleshooting if you want to clip something onto this to test it, but otherwise I don't see any reason to have them sticking out so far from the board. In fact, it might lead to trouble, although the wiring on this thing is so sparse, there's probably no chance really of anything bumping into anything else. So what am I going to do after that? So you may be wondering, hey, why am I not doing the usual approach I take where I do a controlled power up on the variac and start troubleshooting and all that? I could, but a few things. One, this thing is so damn big, and the picture tube is in the cabinet upstairs, and this is not compatible with my color test jig. So I don't really have any way to power it up with a picture tube attached. Yes, I could hook up a speaker. Yes, I could test a high voltage output without a load. I'm not too crazy about doing that. Also, the yoke is disconnected and stuff like that. So I think what I'm going to, not what I think, what I'm going to do is go through and do each board methodically. And when I feel I've done enough work, put this back in the cabinet, hook it back up to the full-size picture tube, and do a variac power-up with the whole thing back in the cabinet.